It looks like Simone Biles is the greatest of all time. On Sunday, she took home her seventh all-around title at the U.S. Gymnastics Championships. One more first-place finish at Nationals would make her the most decorated gymnast in U.S. Championships history, on top of already being the most decorated gymnast in World Championships. Clarence Williams III has transitioned family. May he rest in power. Clarence Williams III, who played Link Hayes in the Mod Squad, died at his home in Los Angeles after battling colon cancer. His manager, Peg Dunnigan, told CNN in a statement Sunday. Williams was 81. Williams was born in New York City on August 21st, 1939. According to the statement, he began his career in a production of Dark Moon of the Moon and appeared on Broadway in The Great Outdoors. His performance in Slow Dance on the Killing Ground won him a Theatre World Award and a Tony nomination, the statement said. Along with his theater performances, Williams also starred in several shows and movies, including 52 Pickup, Against the Wall, Reindeer Games, Purple Rain, The General's Daughter, American Gangster, Half Baked, and Lee Daniels, The Butler. Williams is survived by his sister, Sandra Pugh, daughter, Jamie Phillips, niece, Suyin Shaw, grand-nephews, Elliot Shaw and Essie Shaw, and grandniece, Azaria Verdine. Alright, so in the news, it looks like the EU has banned Belarus Airlines as opposition urges GC sanctions. Belarus carriers will be banned from flying over European Union territory or having access to its airports from Friday, the bloc said, as the country's exiled opposition leader called for more joint Western sanctions. The EU decision is part of planned punitive measures against Belarus in response to Minsk scrambling a warplane to force a landing on May 23rd of a Ryanair flight carrying an opposition journalist, who was then arrested. The move is due to take effect at midnight Central European Time and requires EU member states, quote, to deny permission to land and take off from or overfly their territories to any aircraft operated by Belarusian air carriers, quote, EU government said in a statement. The ban also includes marketing carriers, which sell seats on planes operated by another airline as part of a code share agreement. All right, let's see what else. Biden visits site of Tulsa massacre a century later. While darkness can hide much, it is erasing nothing. It was the first time a president had visited the area to address what happened 100 years ago in Greenwood, the African-American community in Tulsa that was the site of one of the worst outbreaks of racist violence in American history, but one that went largely ignored in history books. Quote, my fellow Americans, this was not a riot, Mr. Biden said as people in the crowd rose to their feet. This was a massacre. Mr. Biden's visit was also intended to highlight steps his administration is taking to close the wealth gap between black and white people in the United States, even as activists criticize him for not going far enough to correct historical wrongs and put the disadvantaged on equal footing. He announced several initiatives to reduce racial disparities, including a pledge to boost federal contracts to minority-owned businesses by 50%, and a rollback of 2 Trump-era actions that have hamstrung fair housing laws. And to note, reparations was not mentioned. So, speaking about apologies and maybe reparations, it looks like Germany recognizes colonial-era massacres in Namibia as genocide. Germany has recognized for the first time that it committed genocide in Namibia during its colonial rule more than a century ago and promised financial support worth more than 1 billion euros. That's 1.2 billion in, US dollars to fund infrastructure projects in the African nation. German settlers killed thousands of Herero and Nama people between 1904 and 1908 after the tribes rebelled against Berlin's rule in the colony, then called German Southwest Africa. Quote, we will now officially refer to these events as what they are from today's perspective, genocide, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas said in a statement on Friday. In light of the historical and moral responsibility of Germany, we will ask forgiveness from Namibia and the victims' descendants for the atrocities committed, he said. The news was welcomed by Namibia. The acceptance on the part of Germany that a genocide was committed in the first step in the right direction. The country's President Hayes Gob's spokesman Alfredo Hingari told AFP news agency. It is the basis for the second step, which is an apology to be followed by reparations, he said. So, you guys have any comments on this regarding Biden and Germany and Namibia?
Yeah, just thank you first, Umoya, for putting those two stories back to back, right? Because I think they are a really clear contrast for what is possible and also what's real in reality right now. You have Biden on the one hand going down to Tulsa to recognize the 100-year anniversary of the massacre / genocide attempt there in Tulsa. We are in the 100-year anniversary week this week, and you have Biden going down there and talking to the survivors, talking to the city of Tulsa about the history, and then apologizing, but then also not talking about reparations, not talking about what comes next. And that's in clear contrast, I think, to what is happening with Germany and Namibia. I think Germany's apology comes with some money, if I'm not mistaken. I know we covered some of this, I believe, last week or maybe the week before. So let's follow up. But the idea here is that the apologies are good, but reparations are needed after, and reparations are better, right? Apologize with returning and repairing the financial and everything else damage that was actually done. So for Mr. Biden to come down there and talk about nothing, of reparations is a really big problem. And this is something that is followed, we know, by a story, maybe 2 or 3 days later, where it's a leak saying that Biden told lawmakers to not expect anything on reparations, right? To not expect anything serious on reparations. So this is really bad. And this is going to be a big problem for Mr. Biden in 2024. It's going to be a big problem for the Democrats in 2022, because not only can we, it seems like, not expect anything much on reparations, it seems like we can't expect anything much on anything, right? Right? He's not going to do anything on police reform. He's not going to do anything on reparations. What is he going to do for Black folks specifically? Seems like nothing.
Yep. CEO, you have any comments on this, or should we move to the next story?
I feel like Chris covered all of it. Let's move on.
All right, let's do it. So let's see what else is in the news. It looks like the job market is starting to increase here. There are now more jobs available than there are now more jobs available than before the pandemic. So why aren't people signing up? So let's see here. The number of job vacancies soared to nearly 15 million by mid-March, but discouraged, hesitant, and fearful job seekers means many positions are still unfilled, according to new data from online job site ZipRecruiter. Online job postings plunged from 10 million before the start of the pandemic last year to just below 6 million last May, as lockdowns and shutdown orders forced businesses to close their doors and reduce or lay off workers. Now, as vaccinations increase and companies are again able to make projections, they're staffing up to capture booming demand, with the number of open positions across all online listings soaring 5 million above the pandemic start. From amusement parks to gyms to airlines, employers across industries are holding massive job fairs and calling back furloughed workers. There are also plenty of good reasons for workers to still hang back, from ongoing concerns about the coronavirus to childcare and managing remote learning to family obligations to holding out for better opportunities. Thoughts on this, fam?
Yeah, I feel like we're at a juncture where the old system wasn't working, but people were scraping by. and making it work. And then when Corona happened, it sort of just shut everything down. And most companies just dumped their workers. Most companies, some did what they could to keep them to keep their businesses up and running, but essentially at the cost of the worker. So now that businesses have the okay to get back in business and get moving again, they're like, oh, business as usual. But now folks are like, nah, 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 nah. Last year you had no problem dropping me off, right? And I was making possibly more money on unemployment. I had the freedom to actually just think and not dedicate 5 out of the 7 days of my life to someone else's work, someone else's biz where you take my profits that I make for you. So I think we are at a juncture where businesses can strong arm and say, we're just going back to the old way, or we can really take another look at how we work in the US and the expectations. It's no longer reasonable for people to be working 2 jobs and still living paycheck to paycheck. All of those essential workers who were quote unquote essential, the moment it came to like, oh, let's give them hazard pay, oh hey, let's pay them for their worth, let's give them a living wage, all of a sudden they turn right real quickly back into burger flippers. And that is problematic.
Yeah, CO said it all, and I want to add one thing, one or two things here. One, we know that the Black U.S. slavery descendant unemployment rate is usually, on average, historically, like twice as high as the non-Black U.S. slavery descendant employment rate or unemployment rate, right? So that, I think, is still the case even right now, as we've seen employment rise as the country has started to lift, different parts of the country have started to lift the restrictions on businesses and on where people can go, right? All that stuff. And here in California, right, we're about a week away from the June 15th grand reopening of California, basically. So a lot of states are going through this process. We have the vaccines, which I think last we checked, even as of this morning, here in California, 70% of adults in California have at least had one shot. And that's what we're going to approach probably nationwide or as we approach July 4th, which is about a month away from now. So we've seen people start to come back out, and we've seen businesses start to reopen, but there's this question about hiring, right? And I think CO hit on everything. And I also think the story that you read, Umoy, hits on everything too. Hits on most of what's going on, right? I think there's also the fact that we're in a transitional phase right now, and so there's still some things that have yet to settle, right? And for all the reasons that CO mentioned. And the last thing to say is that one thing CO mentioned that was really, really true is that we were very vulnerable right before the pandemic. Here in the Sacramento area, we knew that almost 2 out of 3, more than one out of every 2 Black folks working around was what we call asset poor, meaning they did not have enough money, enough savings, enough assets to be okay if they lost their job for 3 months. And by be okay means not fall below poverty for at least 3 months if they lost their income in some way. Well, what happened? Right as that was our living reality, something happened called coronavirus that knocked people off of their income, not just for 3 months, but for 9 months, 10 months, 12 months, right? And so what we have now is, I think, we're dealing with that, and we're dealing with the fallout from the damage that coronavirus did. And so I think that's affecting what we're seeing in terms of the job market right now, writ large. Obviously, the story you're talking about is specifically about all these job openings, and there's this really confusing to me talk right now going on in other circles around, like, whether or not there's this threat of inflation or whether prices are going to rise and whether people are demanding too much money to return back to work, And that's why there's this gap in between the number of job openings versus the number of people who want to take these jobs, right? And I think there's something to the fact that people aren't paying people enough right now, and we've not been paid enough for the past 30, 40 years. So I think wages are going to have to rise in order for that job openings number to come down. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry, go ahead, Tia.
I'm sorry. Just to tag on to what Chris was saying, it's not only wages, but it's also treatment. It's also the hours that you have to work and knowing in advance, being able to set your own schedule. It's also being able to get healthcare. It's also being able, for folks who have to take care of their elderly parents or who have young kids who still need more than 5 days of sick time a year because they are caretakers for other individuals. Like, the previous system did not work for the average worker, and those individuals ended up having to sacrifice themselves and their relationships for the company. And I feel like Corona made it very clear to those people that the company is not going to sacrifice itself or its profits for you. And I'm not saying that across the board, because I do feel like there were some companies that went out of their way and took L's in order to do so. But the mass majority in this capitalistic society just cut them off and did what they needed to do in order to survive, so that the business could survive, as if the business was held above people. And our government did the same thing. You know, instead of doling out money directly to individuals, we gave millions of dollars to corporations, and that money would have gone further had you just given it to the people.
Yeah, I mean, and we also need to think about, like, I think what the federal minimum wage is still at, what, $7 or something like that. And I think I heard a story or something, like, people were talking about with the restaurant workers, especially the waiters and waitresses, like, without tips, they're making like $2, which is way below, what they should be making at a minimum wage. So it's really unfortunate, especially when the society keeps touting, we have all these jobs opening, but in reality, even with the stimulus check, even if you got $2,000, I mean, how far is that really going to go? You know what I mean? That's like, for most people, that's just going to be just your rent, and that's it. And then that stimulus check is gone. So it's really not a stimulus check, for the average American. It's really just, I got to pay some bills just to survive check. That's what really it is. And it's just masking, as Chris was saying, especially with, Black people, just our conditioning right now. So yeah. So if we don't have any other comments on that, we can go to the next one. So let's check out this. Looks like there was a bill that did get vetoed. This was briefly in the news. It's called SB 629, regarding public peace and media access. If anyone who's in California or non-California is interested in this bill that did get vetoed, you can go on to legalinfo.legislature.ca.gov to find more about it. But I'm going to go and read a little bit of what the governor had to say regarding this bill. Governor said, to the members of the California State Senate, I am returning Senate Bill 629 without my signature. This bill would allow authorized representatives of any news service, online news service, newspaper or radio or television station or network to enter areas that have been closed by law enforcement due to a demonstration, march, protest, or rally, including the immediate area surrounding any emergency field command post or any other command post. This bill would additionally prohibit a peace officer from intentionally assaulting, interfering with, or obstructing these duly authorized representatives who are gathering, receiving, or processing information for communication to the public. Media access to the public gatherings, especially protests, is essential for a functioning democracy, and law enforcement should not be able to interfere with those efforts. But I am concerned that this legislation too broadly defines a, quote, duly authorized representative of a news service, online news service, newspaper, or radio, or television station or network, end quote. As written, this bill would allow any person who appears to be engaged in gathering, receiving, or processing information, who produces a business card, press badge, other similar credential, or who is carrying professional broadcasting or recording equipment, to have access to a restricted law enforcement area. This could include those individuals who may pose a security risk, such as white nationalists, extreme anarchists, or other fringe groups with an online presence. So, does anyone have any comments about this bill that did get vetoed?
Oh, I have lots of comments about this. I'll try to narrow them down. The first thing that struck me about this bill was that it was specific, and feels like it came out of the uprisings that occurred, the rebellion in 2020, because it specifically calls out demonstrations, marches, and protests or rallies. It doesn't say period across the board, but it specifically calls that out. And I believe this bill came about, and this is me guessing because I was not a part of, nor have I done the research on the people who put this bill together. But I can say my firsthand experience of being on the ground of police and sheriff's department in Los Angeles, specifically roughhousing, arresting, and disproportionately mistreating the press because they were doing what they were doing, which was witnessing what was going on. And a lot of that witnessing involved police and sheriff misconduct. And it started being used against them in courts and class action lawsuits. And so what they started doing was arresting folks. And a major newswoman named Josie Hong, she's an award-winning journalist out here. She was arrested and manhandled up the wazoo, and it was very clear that she was wearing press badges. She called out her stuff, but they just didn't care. And so this bill would help prevent and protect those type of folks. And I'll let you know that there's independent journalists on the ground. There are folks from ABC, NBC. They run the gambit, as well as internet news. Folks that I would call propaganda, folks that I would call like real journalism, but that's subjective. The fact that he vetoed this bill is, to me, just shows the cahoots of the use of law enforcement as an occupying force. There is no reason, if we have the freedom of press, which is the right to publish newspaper, magazines, and other printed matter without governmental restrictions, and is subject to certain laws like liability and sedition and such like that. But this bill literally spells out a legal, quote unquote, legal way to prevent the freedom of press. So when there is a murder, or there is an uprising, a protest, or a rally, these individuals are now subject to dispersal announcements. When the cops are like, hey, you have 5 minutes to leave. If you stay here, you're subject to arrest. That, with this being vetoed, it leaves a gray area where press and legal observers and such can now be held accountable for that. They can no longer be observers of events. They are now guilty of simply being there and watching. And that is extremely problematic. And I can tell you a lot of people over the past year had court cases dropped simply because the press was there, simply because the green hats were there to be legal observers and to watch. And without that, the normal everyday person who might not have generational wealth, or who might not have access to lawyers, or fighting against an entire state, and the state always wins because all the cop has to do is write down whatever they want on the report, and it's taken as truth. But as humans, as citizens, we don't have that same right. We don't have that same power. But if a lawyer is standing there with a green hat as a legal observer and says, hey, I saw the same situation. Yes, the cop wrote ABC down, but I saw XYZ down. XYZ happened. You now have an actual fighting chance. And this veto is squashing that. This is extremely problematic in the way that specifically LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department moves.
All right. So, Chris, what are your thoughts in terms of, one, this bill, and two, in terms of the veto process?
So just real quick on the bill itself. One, I want to co-sign everything CO said. I don't have much to add at all. Just to say that, one, police have their own media too. So let's keep that in mind, right? That police departments all across the country have their own media departments, have their own media people, have their own spokespeople, have their own media teams. They deploy those media teams, right? So police have media too, right? And so in any situation where there is a attempt to define what media is or who's not media or make rules by the police for media also has an impact on the police's own media, or at least the police's media in relation to the other media that's out there, right? Because the police media is going to have one version of things, but if it can also write the rules for the other media, right, then we have some power issues that I think we have to think more about too, because the police have their own media and they have their own money for media and they get their own money from the public, right? So there's stuff to talk about there. And then lastly, who is media and who decides, right? This is a part of what the bill is trying to figure out. And there's a question about what is the definition of, quote, duly authorized, media representative or something like that, right? This is a big question of the bill. Who is media? Who decides who's media? And if you ask me, does the executive branch, which is what the police and this part of the government represent, right? This is the law enforcement. This is the executive branch of government that enforces the laws, right? So does the executive branch of government get to decide who media is, what media is, or is that something that's better reserved for the legislature, right? Or should it be done by some other thing, right? We don't, we have to talk more about that, especially now because of the new types of media folks that are out there, right? People like us, right? And people not like us, right? Who may have press badges, may not have press badges, but whether or not they do or don't, do good media, right? Some of the best media we have is done by people who don't have any press credentials at all. And to be honest with you, some of the most media moments of our last, how many years, especially if you talk about social justice and criminal justice work, comes from people who just whipped out their phone but became media, right? So those are questions that I think this bill gets to, and I again want to co-sign everything CO said. In terms of the process, so from my understanding, either the legislature is going to have to override this veto, right, with more than majorities of support in both parts of the legislature, I believe, or the legislature or the people who wrote the bill are going to have to bring it back next time and try to bring it back either in a form that gets it signed or that can get it through without, with a veto proof, what we call a veto proof majority. So that's what we know in terms of process. I'll stop there.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that. That totally makes sense. And it looks like this bill was introduced by Senators McGuire, Hill, and Hertzberg. And the principal co-author was Senator Weiner. So yes, if anybody's interested in that, just look up on legislative information at the legalinfo.legislature.ca.gov. All right, and so Chris, I'll let you take this one away, man. ACA 3, involuntary servitude.
Yes, so ACA 3, Assembly Constitutional Amendment 3, which is a resolution that proposes to the people of the state of California an amendment to the state constitution, right? And what the amendment does is it would change our state constitution to get rid of the exception for involuntary servitude, which is there right now. So right now, Section 6 of our state constitution. So our federal government has a constitution, but our state has a constitution too, right? And what Section 6 of our state's constitution says, and I quote, slavery is prohibited. Involuntary servitude is prohibited, except to punish crime. So I'm going to read that again. Section 6 right now of our state of California Constitution says, quote, slavery is prohibited, period. Involuntary servitude is prohibited except to punish crime, period. And so what the ACA 3 amendment would do would be to change this part of our state's constitution and get rid of the parts that make the exception for involuntary servitude. And it would say involuntary servitude, meaning serving involuntarily, is not allowed in any way, for no exceptions here in the state of California. So the new Section 6 would read, slavery and involuntary servitude are prohibited, period. That's what Assembly Constitutional Amendment 3 is about. That's what it would do. It's an Assembly Constitutional Amendment. So in terms of process, first, it would have to get through the state of California legislature, and then it would go to us, the voters, to approve, because any changes to our state constitution, I believe, or most changes, if I'm not mistaken, have to be done by the people through ballot measure. So this is something that's probably going to come to us next year sometime for a ballot measure. We don't know exactly when, and that's if it gets through the state of California legislature. That's my understanding of the process right now. If there are any updates or changes to that, we will let you know.
All right. Do you have any comments on this, CEO, or ready to wrap it?
I'm stoked about this one, to be honest, and I would love for this to happen on the federal level. I do wholeheartedly believe there's going to be a huge pushback, because here in California they use slave labor, aka prison labor, to do a lot of stuff, from working fighting forest fires out here, to creating jeans and the stuff that you see on TV of inmates stamping license plates. A lot of money is made off of their labor, where they are paid pennies on the dollar per hour. But big businesses make huge profits off of that. And our fine vice president, I used to find the word fine very loosely, she caught a lot of flack for not letting people out of prison, because the state needed them to fight fires, even though their lives were at risk, even though they didn't necessarily need to be in there for all types of stuff that we don't need to get into right now. But she kept people in prison so that they could work. And so I'm positive there'd be a huge pushback on this, but I am absolutely for ACA 3.
All right. Well, that's it. That's in the news.